I discovered a Civil War veteran's last written note. It's the most disturbing thing I've read. While doing historical research recently, I came upon the following primary document, the suicide note of a mentally traumatized and ruined Confederate veteran. That in and of itself sounds unremarkable, but the contents of the note, if genuine, are remarkable. The veteran set out for a life of rugged individualism into the wilderness, only to face terror even greater than the war. The note weaves an incredible and repugnant tale of murder, extremism, extraterrestrial life, and too many other atrocities to enumerate here. Tempting as it is to write it off as a fabrication, I have reason to believe it has verisimilitude. Without further ado, here is the note. I swear I am not insane. I am wholly rational and am speaking the truth. My name is Byron Lewis. I was born in 1840, fought in the Civil War for the South, and have resided in the city for the last decade. It is now the year 1903. See, I am aware of reality. To whomever finds my lifeless body hanging from the ceiling, I'm sorry you had to see this. Accordingly, I will, for the first time, do something I thought I would never do, commit to paper and share with another human being what I saw out in the Appalachian Mountains in the accursed years 1880 and 1881. It had been 15 years since the war, and my mind was still reeling. I thought I could escape the madness and restore my peace of mind with an autonomous life in the wilderness. Instead, I was thrust into a surreal and grotesque nightmare that I am still not wholly convinced was real. If the night terrors about the war ravaged my mind, then my current night terrors have scrambled it. I still remember my cabin vividly, and the godly beauty of the mountains. I was certain I could convalesce there, but I also remembered that vile reverend and that ghoulish doctor and the ghastly and cadaverous self-proclaimed prophet. And that is just scratching the surface of the horror. There were also the murders and the inhuman things and the experiments. I guess I should take a few steps back and start from the beginning, from when it all went to hell, December 1880. Life out there had hitherto been everything a man could ever hope for. Quiet, except for the sounds of nature. Clean, fresh water from the beautiful streams, teeming with fish and game. I was a long way from the battlefield now, thank God Almighty. There is no glory or honor in war. That is nothing than a lie to trick stupid young men into risking, and in many instances, sacrificing life and limb for the rich who never gave a damn about us. The Gentile plantation class used us to protect their perverse institution, and so many went and buried themselves for it. I suppose I was more fortunate than many. My scar was on my head. And I genuinely do believe my mental scars were mending and that I was on an upward trajectory. Granted, the dreams still plagued my mind, but I was otherwise doing better. I feasted on an abundance of fresh fish, and I hoped to hunt a deer soon. The scenery was beautiful and the sky clear. No hordes of people, no sick and dying beggars, no shouting, nothing. Well, almost nothing. I had not seen a soul out there, but I had heard 'em. It was a cold winter night when I awoke from that most loathsome of recurring nightmares, the one about that Union soldier. Of course, that nightmare pales in comparison to the ones I have now. He was young, not a day older than myself, and I was just a man of 23 at Gettysburg, a poor kid in blue. He was a scared lad just like me. In a different life and different world, we would have shared a drink in a tavern. But unfortunately, it was this life, in this world. It was him or me. I'm still haunted by the memories of my bayonet spilling his crimson blood, of his howls of agony. It was all wrong, so wrong. But I must digress. I had gasped and heaved in my bed, the sounds of the battlefield fading away, the screams and cannons and drums becoming faint and distant, until I realized the drums hadn't stopped. I could hear the drums that were very real, not just fragments of a tortured memory. And there was chanting, too, up in the mountains. I struggled to discern words, but to no avail. I do not even think that the language was English. I do not wish to know what language it is, nor did I wish to meet the speakers of this hideous tongue. Thankfully, they sounded far away, and I easily went back to sleep after a few nips of whiskey. I thought I was possibly overreacting, as I was prone to do, but I still wished to have no contact with these folks. I had no reason to believe anything evil or malevolent was afoot, but it felt wrong. Why would there be rituals out there? Why would there be any large groups of people? Why would they speak a foreign language? Why would anyone other than myself have been out this far from civilization? I tried not to dwell on it, to convince myself they meant no harm to anyone, that this is just an enclave of folks like me seeking repose in nature. How wrong I was. Even as evidence mounted that things were amiss, I remained determined not to leave my homestead. I should have followed my instinct. I apologize for the rambling and repetitious speech, but my nerves are gone. But things finally came to a head about a month after I first heard the drums. All plausible deniability came crashing down. I was out hunting when I came across a small tent sequestered amidst brush, as if the occupant was deliberately trying to hide. Inside, I could hear the muffled crying of a woman in great distress. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" I asked gently. It never occurred to me that I was likely being watched or in any sort of peril.
"Please go away. Leave me."
She sobbed. "I mean you no harm," I said gently.
"It is not safe here. Stop endangering me."
She wailed. "If there's danger, you should come with me," I offered. I was genuinely concerned and sympathetic for this young woman inexplicably stranded out here.
"I would danger you,"
She said sadly.
"Let me accept my fate."
"Fate?" I questioned. With resignation and realization that I was not leaving, she came out of her tent. I felt a deep pang of guilt and sorrow as I saw she was very pregnant. Even worse, she didn't look a day over 20. I must have visibly winced judging by her reaction.
"See?"
She asked pointedly.
"I'm in no shape for travel."
"My cabin is nearby," I offered. "If you need food or anything."
"I would endanger you, sir."
She interrupted.
"Get out of here before they find you."
Who? I wondered if she was possibly referring to the people behind the drums and chanting.
"Those lunatics up in the mountains. Sticking crazy bastards."
Her voice was inflected with genuine terror. "Look, I can help you," I started to offer, but she shook her head frantically. I sighed before offering her some berries I'd recently found. She hesitantly took them, and I offered to bring her more food the next day. She was both reluctant and thankful, and realized I was determined to help. She acquiesced. Before reluctantly leaving, she still adamantly refused to go with me. I asked how she ended up out here with such a rough group. Her story chilled me to the bone.
"I'm only out here through sheer misfortune and desperation,"
She began.
"I was orphaned as a girl, and my husband was killed on the job months ago. I found myself destitute and about to bring a child into the world. A child who will never know their father."
She sobbed. I tried to console her, but she continued telling me her story.
"I was so desperate. I was out on the street. I had nothing. I had sworn to myself that I wouldn't be reduced to selling myself, but I had no choice. I had to abandon all pride."
She was struggling not to cry now.
"I was in the town saloon about 6 months ago when I met a nicely dressed young man, one of those missionary types. He told me a group of people who had what people such as myself needed. They could provide food and shelter. I really didn't know what to believe anymore. What God would allow such tragedy to befall me and my unborn child?"
"I don't know anything about that. I stopped being observant after the war," I offered, but she wasn't listening. She was talking on, almost to herself more than me.
I accepted his offer. I was in dire need, and anything was better than prostitution. I allowed him to take me out here, back to that den of murderers and fanatics. I knew almost right away I made a mistake. That sick reverend.
She had to regain her composure at the mere mention of this figure.
"Disgusting old hog,"
She said of him.
"bald, fat, and filthy."
She shuddered.
He told me I had to do favors for him if I wanted shelter. I slept with the pig several times to stay alive.
I was utterly revolted by now and was beyond any words I could offer in consolation.
It was horrible sharing a bed with him, listening to his awful sermons, the sounds coming from the caves, the beatings of disloyal members. I tried to keep my head down and survive, but I knew I had to escape when I started to near childbirth. I was told I was not allowed to raise my own child because I'm not enlightened. I was not to be trusted with raising a child. An enlightened member would assume the role of parenting. That sick old man went so far as to say my child was the group's property. I stole some supplies and ran off a few days ago. I had to.
I started before trailing off. I had no idea what to say. If she was referring to the people I'd heard with the drums, I'd been sleeping within earshot of some dangerous people.
You need to get out of here,
She said firmly. Please, there must be some way.
You can't help me. Nothing can. Go!
She pulled a small knife out of her pocket and waved it wildly at me. It was clear she didn't trust me and would refuse my help. Furthermore, I had no desire to grapple with her. I simply raised my hands peacefully and walked away slowly. I still feel great guilt for that. Maybe I could have saved her from that horrible fate she met, but I could never have foreseen what happened next. I was awakened from my sleep that night by a woman's piercing, blood-curdling scream. Even through the walls of my cabin, it was deafening and horrifying. It was more than just a scream of fear and terror, but an agonized scream of pure pain. The screams rang through the darkness of the night until they stopped, likely signifying a merciful release from the suffering. But the perversity was just beginning, for as soon as the pain screams of agony stopped, I could hear another scream. The cries of a baby freshly ushered into this world. The woman must have gone into labor. I wanted to set out and look for her, but the wilderness was hardly a safe place while cloaked in darkness. I resolved to set out tomorrow morning. From the moment I set foot outside my cabin, I knew the prospects of survival were dim for both mother and child. It was blisteringly cold, and it had started to snow at some point during the night. Rocked with guilt, I set out to where her campsite had been. I strained to listen as I marched through the snow-covered land, trying and failing to detect the sounds of an infant. I knew that meant nothing good. My worst fears were confirmed as I arrived at the campsite and was hit in the face by the stench of death. The first thing I saw was the poor woman's body, a sight forever etched into my mind. Copious amounts of crimson blood, now dry, stained the inside of the tent. I recoiled further as I took the rest of the sight in. Her face was contorted into an expression of pain and terror, and her abdomen was cut wide open. There was no sign of the infant. As my stomach lurched and I retched several times, other sinister clues entered the periphery of my vision. Footprints heading towards those mountains, deeper into the woods and further than I'd ever ventured. Then there was the envelope, labeled in bold lettering as a writ of judgment. With great fear and apprehension, I ignored the primal urge to run and open the envelope. I can still recall the contents verbatim, even more than 2 decades later.
By the order of the Reverend, acting in the divine power vested in him by the prophet, the subject of this writ is condemned to die for heresy and theft from the commune. It is furthermore ordered that the stolen property be retrieved and returned to the headquarters of the Church of the Ephemeral World. It is so ordered on this December 26, 1880.
Jesus, I said as I threw the paper down, utterly repulsed. So many thoughts were whirling through my head. Were those mountain folks the culprits? Did property refer to her child as I thought it did? Just what kind of evil men were out there? What kind of reverend was this? I spent little time pondering such questions, though, as I was soon overtaken by an eerie and pervasive feeling that I was being watched. I had to get out of here and out of these woods. My homestead be damned. I made haste back to my cabin, praying as I had not prayed in years that the now rapidly falling snow would obscure my tracks. Much as I wanted to get out, I knew I had to get supplies. I knew lack of preparation in the snow could be just as badly as those deranged madmen. As I made it back to my cabin, my face crusted with snow, I knew with a sinking heart that the storm was too strong to travel through. As much as I hated it, I knew I would have to wait for it to pass before fleeing. I had a gnawing feeling in my stomach that I wouldn't make it unperturbed through the storm. I was right. Loath as I was to sleep, I knew I would eventually need to get some shut-eye. I stayed fully clothed and kept my rifle on my lap, sleeping upright. I was determined to be ready for anything. I felt as if I was back in the battlefield that night, except the terror was greatly exacerbated. Instead of facing the infantry and cavalry of the North, I was dealing with an unseen terror. I don't know when they came in or how they even followed my trail in such a blizzard, but when I woke, I found the interior of the cabin illuminated by a lantern. A large bearded face could be seen behind the light. I moved to defend myself, but was kicked in the stomach by another man as I tried to stand. Before I could do anything else, I was grabbed by each arm by 2 strong men.
Interloper.
The man with the lantern snarled. I struggled to find the words to respond.
You come here on our hallowed grounds where we have searched for the truth for the past 15 years, and you ignore the truth. Heretic.
He said in his ragged voice.
The Reverend wishes to speak with you.
My blood ran cold. I hoped against all hope that this wasn't the same Reverend who had had that poor woman murdered, but I knew it was. Before I could process much else, I was struck in the head and knocked unconscious. I awoke in a small, freezing cold cabin. Outside I could hear an assembled mass of people. I struggled to hear anything, but could make out the sounds of a sermon of sorts.
And no matter what those accursed heretics in town say, the truth will prevail.
The truth said.
We will spread the truth and spread our gospel throughout this ephemeral world. We will awaken people to the true nature of existence and being. The world will accept our teachings, if not by their own volition, then by force.
The man was yelling fervently now.
We fight for true salvation. We fight for the rebirth of man. Look at me. I am 82 years old, but was an ignorant fool for 67 years. I am 15 years old as my reborn self. For years I was in the gutter. I was cast aside by all. Then the prophet in his vision picked me out of the trash and saved me. This is the personal victory and enlightenment we seek. We will win. We will alter this plane of life. All hail the truth. All hail the church, and all hail our prophet.
The man finished.
All hail the prophet.
The crowd repeated. As soon as the speech had concluded, I heard the familiar sound of drums. I immediately recognized them and immediately realized these lunatics were the same people I had heard on those nights. I resigned myself to my doom and accepted I was probably minutes or hours from death. I need to take a break from transcribing this now. The contents only get worse and I need to steel myself before going over them again.